If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. That's what my 13-year-old niece Luna said while peeling the plastic off the brand new phone I bought her. $1,000 gift, $1,000 insult. She said it like a joke, but the room 30 people deep with blood relatives erupted with laughter. Except me. I stood there in the center of Wrenwood Estate's living room, one hand still in my pocket, the other holding a paper plate with untouched cake. My fingers tightened around the plastic fork as the voices around me blurred into a wall of noise. No one looked up. Not Cynthia, not Mom, not even Dad, who actually raised his beer and muttered, "She's not wrong." The chandelier above us flickered slightly, casting shifting light over the perfectly framed family photos on the wall. Faces smiling, people pretending. I stared at them like artifacts from a life I didn't recognize anymore. "Thanks for the phone," Uncle Luna said, already leaning against her mother, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. That was it. No apology, no shame. Just cold fingers, sharper words, and a room too loud to hear me breaking. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Because that's what I always did. If I disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Well then, tell me this: if your own family said that to you, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, subscribe. Because stories like this, we tell them every day. Silence was always the background noise at every family gathering. I'd stand there smiling just enough, talking just enough, pouring wine, snapping photos, and later quietly covering the bill. After the birthday party, I returned to my apartment at Magnolia District. The kitchen light glowed a soft amber. I washed 2 glasses, dried my hands on a dish towel, and unlocked my phone. The screen lit up, reflecting faintly on the brushed steel fridge door. I scrolled through one of my pinned notes: recurring Wrenwood payments. Power bill for the estate. Auto-paid. Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus. All on my card. Luna's school laptop last year. Cynthia's emergency credit card balance I cleared last summer. Dad used to call it being a good son. Mom would sigh, half joking, half serious. "If it weren't for you, this house would have fallen apart." But those words were always whispered, never said, when the rest of the family was listening. At family dinners, I wasn't Silas the provider. I was Silas the helper, the background, the one holding the camera but never in the shot. I remember one Christmas, Cynthia laughed and said in front of everyone, "Silas is always so alone, cold, like he doesn't know how to love." I smiled. But inside I thought, it's not that I don't love. I've just spent too long being loved transactionally. Last fall, Luna messaged me asking for a new computer. I just finished a long shift. Exhausted, I asked, "What specs do you need?" No reply, just an Amazon link. I clicked it, bought it. The next day she messaged, "Got it." No thank you, no emoji, just got it. I used to tell myself, this is family. They don't need to say it out loud. I get them. But now I understand. I was just a shadow, and they've lived with that shadow for so long they thought it was part of the furniture. Always there, always silent, always free. I remember the smell of Mom's spiced apple cider, but she hasn't poured me a mug in years. I remember the low rumble of Dad snoring on the couch, how I used to leave a blanket over him when he passed out drunk. I remember Luna when she was little, wrapping her arms around my legs saying, "Don't go yet, Uncle." But all those memories live only in me. None of them remember that version of us. And after what happened at that party, I finally saw it clearly. I've been investing emotion, money, and time into a system that doesn't even realize it's running on me. Maybe to them, I'm just an emotional router, always online, always reliable, always free. And when I go offline, they'll learn what disconnection really means. I didn't leave that night angry. I left quiet, precise. At 2:07 a.m., I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the same shirt from the party. The apartment was still, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking clock above the sink. The phone in my hand glowed against the dark. First tap, freeze all family credit card authorizations. Second tap, cancel every auto payment connected to Wrenwood Estate utilities, streaming mortgage supplements. Done. No fireworks, no warning, just a clean surgical cut. The next morning I moved differently. No panic, no suitcase, just a plan. I packed light 3 shirts, my charger, a notebook, a pair of boots I hadn't worn in years. I left behind frame photos, books they never asked about, and drawers full of gifts from birthdays no one remembered. Then I reached under my bed and pulled out something I hadn't touched in a decade. A black backpack, worn at the edges, silent, reliable, like me. I filled it not with essentials, but with proof. Bank statements, screenshots, receipts, printed emails, every transaction, every subscription, every financial stitch I'd sewn into their lives. I organized the documents into folders. One for Cynthia, one for Dad, one for Mom. Not out of spite, out of clarity. They said no one would notice if I disappeared. Let them see what vanishes when I do. By 8:00 p.m., Wrenwood Estate was lit up again, birthday balloons still tied to the porch rails, voices spilling from the windows. I parked 2 blocks away, walked under street lamps with the backpack slung over one shoulder. No one saw me come in. No one heard the door creak open. I moved through that house like a shadow that used to belong there. Down the hallway past the photos, past the table where Luna had opened my gift and laughed. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, set the backpack down carefully, and left. Not a word, not a note, just silence. When I stepped outside, the fall air hit harder than I expected. The scent of overwatered grass, the distant sound of someone cheering at a sports broadcast, the click of a silverware on ceramic through the dining room window. None of it mine. Back at Magnolia District, I sat by the window, with the lights off, watching the city breathe. There was no guilt, no second guessing, only a strange kind of stillness. They'd wake up tomorrow, try to stream a show, swipe a card, pay a bill, and the world they thought they controlled would quietly start breaking. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because they needed to feel what it's like to lose something they never valued. Not a tantrum, not revenge, just subtraction. I was gone. By the time the sun rose over Wrenwood Estate, the unraveling had already begun. It started with the smallest things. Mom trying to stream her morning gospel show, only to be met with a frozen loading screen. Cynthia's pharmacy card swipe, flashing red. Dad reaching for the thermostat and realizing it was locked out, disconnected from the smart controls I'd set up years ago. By mid-morning, I could feel their panic radiating through my phone, not from calls I answered, but from the ones I let ring unanswered one after another. The vibrations came in waves, from Mom, from Cynthia, from Dad. Group messages, missed calls, voicemails that stacked like bricks, building a wall of disbelief. I didn't reply, didn't flinch. I just sat on the couch, bathed in the hush of my apartment, coffee cooling in my hand. Outside, the Magnolia District moved on with its day. Lawns were trimmed, doors clicked shut. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at nothing. It felt distant clean, a world untouched by obligation. The first voicemail came from Mom. Her voice tight, sweetened with that brittle tone she used when she wanted to sound calm but wasn't. Something about a banking glitch, about how she was sure I'd fix it. That word again, fix, my eternal role. But I wasn't fixing anything anymore. I let the messages pile up, watched Cynthia's anger sharpen with each text, watched Dad's frustration harden into threats. And all the while I did nothing. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. By late afternoon, their reaction escalated. The front camera on my apartment pinged a notification. 3 figures on the porch. Cynthia flushed and pacing, phone in hand. Luna slouched against the wall, thumbs tapping, her screen expression glazed over. And somewhere behind them, Dad's shadow in the hallway, arms folded. Then came the pounding. Sharp, rhythmic. Not desperate yet, just entitled. Just the sound of people used to getting answers when they demanded them. I sat in silence. Let them knock. Let them speak to the door as if it owed them something. Because that door, it was me now. Closed, unmoving, locked from the inside out. Eventually they left, back down the stairs, back into the confusion I had refused to carry anymore. That night I walked the river path near my building. The concrete still held the heat from the afternoon. The air smelled of old leaves and city wind. Overhead, the sky stretched wide and dark, not empty, just quiet. I stopped on a bridge and leaned against the railing, watching the city flicker on the water. Lights rippling like echoes. Cars in the distance blurred like memories that didn't belong to me anymore. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not free, not yet, but beginning to lift. Back at home, I turned off my phone completely, slid it into the drawer. No more buzzes, no more red numbers on the screen, just stillness. They said if I disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Well, now they were noticing, and silence was finally saying everything I never did. It started just after dawn. A heavy, frantic knocking that shook my apartment door in 3 bursts, followed by voices louder than they had any right to be at that hour. I didn't move from my spot on the couch. I'd been up for a while, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't need to. Not anymore. I sipped slowly from a mug of black coffee, watching dust spin in the shaft of sunlight creeping across my floor. The pounding came again. Then a voice. Dad's voice. Muffled but unmistakable. It had that old weight to it, the bark of command I used to flinch at as a boy. But now it was just sound. Just echoes from a version of me that no longer lived here. I didn't answer. I heard the handle rattle once, then twice. He didn't have a key. I'd made sure of that. Then came the words. Sharp, accusatory, a demand for answers, a question about pride, a lecture about family. And beneath it all, fear. He was scared. They all were. Not because they missed me, but because the scaffolding they'd built their comfort on had collapsed and the man who used to hold it up was no longer playing along. Eventually I heard the footsteps retreat, the slam of a car door. Silence. Then came the texts. From Mom. One after another. Some soft and pleading. Others sharp with disappointment, crafted to guilt me back into position. No response. I spent the rest of the day moving through the quiet, watering my plants, sorting old documents, standing by the window watching people pass below, parents tugging toddlers, delivery guys with headphones, and an old woman walking a dog in a blue sweater. That evening, the silence broke again. This time it wasn't a knock. It was a key in the lock. The sound froze me. There should have been no key. Only one copy existed, kept in a drawer no one had touched in years. And yet the door swung open. Dad stepped inside, sweat on his brow, breathing hard. Mom close behind him, her expression stretched thin between anger and concern. "You think you can lock us out?" he snapped. "You think this is what grown men do?" I didn't respond. I stood there, towel still around my neck, hair damp from a shower I hadn't even finished drying from. Water dripped onto the floor, but inside me everything was dry, cold, still. "You used me," I said. Calm, steady. Not loud, but it landed like a punch. Mom's voice cracked as she stepped forward, tears rising fast. "We're your family." "No," I said. "You were my obligation, my utility bill, my monthly subscription." Dad stepped in closer. His hand curled into a fist just slightly. "Try it," I said softly. He didn't. He couldn't. We both knew the truth. He wasn't a fighter, never was. Just a loud man who mistook volume for strength. I let him stand there in the doorway, between who I used to be and who I'd already become. "What did you do?" Mom asked, her voice breaking. "The cards don't work. Cynthia can't pay her rent. Everything's gone." I nodded. "That's right," I said. "Everything I paid for. Everything I managed. It's over." "You think we needed you?" Dad sneered. "We don't need you. You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back." "I won't," I said. I looked him dead in the eye as I said it, and something shifted in him. His posture sagged. His mouth opened to respond, but no words came. They left soon after slamming the door behind them, but the sound had no sting. It was just wood and metal, closing on an old life, one I wasn't returning to. That night I stood at the kitchen window with the lights off, watching the city breathe beyond the glass. And I realized something simple, something clean. The old me, the one who nodded, who paid, who kept quiet, he died at that door. And the man standing here now, he wasn't leaving. The message came 3 days later. Just a short text from Dad. "Let's talk, just us. No drama. Liberty Field. Games at 7. I stared at the screen for a full minute. "No drama," he said. Coming from the man who banged on my door like he was serving a warrant. Still something in me knew it was time. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. For the final cut. I didn't reply, but I showed up. The stadium was packed. Liberty Field on a Friday night swarmed with fans in blue and gold. The air buzzed with drums, chanced the metallic clatter of bleachers under thousands of stomping feet. I spotted him instantly, section 12, row F. Alone. seats around him conspicuously empty despite the sold-out crowd. He held something in his lap, a black backpack. My black backpack, the same one I had left at Wrenwood Estate like a dropped anchor, and he brought it here like a bargaining chip. I walked down the aisle, not rushing, not avoiding eye contact. He saw me, smiled crooked performative, the kind he used when neighbors were watching. "Surprised you came," he shouted over the noise, patting the seat next to him. I sat slowly, eyes locked on the backpack. "This what we're here for?" I asked. His grin faltered. "You left it," he said. "Thought you might want to explain. Whatever all this is. We read it. All of it." I said nothing. He leaned closer, voice dropping into that old condescending register. "You think you're clean, that you're better than us. You've been hiding things. You always were too quiet, to be honest." "Open it," I said. "Let's see what you think you know." He hesitated. His hand hovered over the zipper, then pulled back. "You think this changes anything?" he snapped. "You want to expose us? Go ahead. Tell the whole stadium how you were the saint paying our bills." I turned slightly, eyes sweeping the stands, the crowd too loud to care. They were strangers. They didn't know our names, and that's what made it perfect. "You think they'll side with you?" I asked. "They don't know me, but they sure as hell don't know you either." He laughed dry and desperate. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't burn family like this." "You already did," I said. That stopped him. "You want to talk betrayal?" I continued calm as ever. "I paid Cynthia's rent for 2 years. Covered your gambling debt when the bank started calling the house. Bought Luna's phone the night she said I didn't matter. You laughed. All of you did." His face twisted. "Shut up," he hissed. "No. You brought the backpack. Let's unpack it." I reached over, unzipped it myself, pulled out a folder, thick with printouts. Receipts. Statements. Proof. I stood, turned toward the people behind us, faces vaguely curious, now sensing tension, and I raised my voice just enough to be heard. "This bag holds every cent I gave to a family that told me I didn't exist." A few heads turned. Phones came out. Dad stayed seated, his face drained of color. I dropped the folder into his lap. "You told me I'd come crawling back," I said. "You were wrong." I turned and walked back up the stairs, past the whispers, the flickers of recognition, the cameras that would forget us by morning. But he wouldn't forget. I didn't look back, because I didn't need to. At the top of the stairs, I paused only once, just long enough to feel the roar of the stadium behind me, the weight of the backpack no longer on my shoulder. And then I left Liberty Field behind. The silence followed me, but this time it wasn't empty. It was earned. The next morning, my phone lit up like a dying star. Calls, messages, voicemails spilling over one another. Cynthia, Mom, even Dad. I didn't answer. I didn't even read them. I made coffee slowly, sat by the window, let the mug warm my hands while the rest of the city rushed into a day I had no intention of joining. Silence used to be something I endured. Now it was armor. The first call that broke through was from the building manager. Apparently, my family was downstairs again, causing a scene. They were told to leave. Security escorted them out. That evening, I stood at the window again, and sure enough, there they were. Down on the sidewalk. Mom pacing with a tissue. Cynthia holding her phone up, trying to catch signal, or maybe just attention. Dad standing apart, arms crossed, eyes scanning the windows like he could sense me watching. He couldn't, because I wasn't there anymore. Not really. I'd stopped being part of their world the moment they laughed in that room. Everything after that was just echo. Noise after the explosion. They started saying things they never said before. Cynthia's messages turned bitter. Blaming me. "You ruined everything." Then softer. "Please just talk to me. I didn't mean it. I was scared. I read them once." Then deleted them all. Mom's messages were different, drenched in guilt. "You're breaking our hearts. This family is all we have." No acknowledgement of the years I'd held them up. No apology for how quickly they dropped me. Dad. He went from furious to pathetic in record time. At first threats, then begging, finally an invitation. "Let's talk like men. Our team plays this weekend. Come with me, no drama." I could hear the trap before he even finished the sentence. But I said yes, because I wanted him to see me say no. And he did. At Liberty Field, with the world spinning around us, I put everything on the table. He had nothing left to twist, no more levers to pull, and when I walked away, I didn't flinch, I didn't break, I didn't look back. I went home, put my phone in a drawer and left it there. A week passed. Then a letter came in the mail, handwritten, Mom's script. Your father's getting sick. Cynthia's losing her mind. We're falling apart. Please come home. I didn't finish reading it. I didn't need to. They were falling apart. Good. Because for the first time I wasn't. I didn't change my number. Didn't move. Didn't hide. I simply stopped participating. The world I used to orbit around Renwood Estate group chats, Sunday dinners I never really belonged to, kept spinning but without its silent axis. Weeks passed. The messages slowed. The calls turned into voicemails, then into silence. Not the kind that hurts. The kind that confirms something's finally over. I kept living, one clean day at a time. Morning walks, quiet meals, books left open in the middle because no one needed me urgently. Sometimes I'd catch myself checking the front camera out of habit, expecting to see someone pacing with righteous entitlement or fake concern. But the porch stayed empty. They'd stopped trying. For now. Then came the next wave. One afternoon, my landlord knocked. A little uncomfortable. Said my family had been by again. Loud. Demanding. Refusing to leave. He told them he'd call the police next time. I nodded. Thanked him. Later that night, I watched the footage from the building's security feed. There they were, Mom, shoulders slumped. Cynthia on the verge of screaming. Dad pale. Pacing like a trapped animal. They looked small. The kind of small that only comes when someone loses their gravity. Eventually, they gave up and walked away. No drama, no shouting, just a slow retreat. Still, I knew them, knew how long it would take before the next tactic. The cycle always returns when people have no accountability. And I was right. A week later, Cynthia started showing up at my workplace, once at reception, another time outside the building's parking deck, crying one day, cursing the next. I never spoke to her, never moved toward her, just watched her through the glass, wondering if she finally understood that love isn't a subscription you cancel when it stops being convenient. Not long after, a delivery arrived at my door. No sender, no card, inside a photo. It showed the family dining room dark, candles lit, everyone bundled in jackets. Mom's caption scrawled on the back, "We have nothing left." I tore it in half and dropped it into the trash. They wanted me to feel guilt, but what I felt was clarity. This wasn't punishment. It was balance being restored. They weren't suffering because I was cruel. They were suffering because they refused to believe the man who kept the lights on might eventually turn them off. I kept my days simple, focused, did work I liked, ate meals I chose, and for once, silence wasn't loneliness. It was peace. One crisp morning in late autumn, I was walking home from the market, bag of groceries in one hand, and I saw him, Dad, across the street, standing near the corner, eyes darting like a man waiting for something or someone to save him. When he spotted me, his face lit up, not with joy, but with something uglier. Hope. He stepped forward, already speaking. But I didn't stop, didn't slow down. I walked past him like he wasn't real. He reached out, grabbed my arm. "You can't just do this," he hissed. "You're my son." I stopped, looked him in the eye. "No," I said. "I was your wallet." He flinched. "We raised you. We gave you everything." "You used me," I replied. "Now you have nothing." He clenched his jaw. "You think you're better than us. You think you can just walk away. I know I can." And I did. He swung at me, weak, sloppy. The hit barely grazed my shoulder. He stumbled forward, catching himself against the building wall. I stood still, didn't even blink. "Pathetic," I whispered. He looked up, eyes wild with that familiar fire. "You'll come crawling back. You always do. You're nothing without us." I laughed, once, loud and sharp. It echoed down the empty street like the final crack in a rotten structure. "I was nothing with you," I said, and I turned away. That night, I placed my phone in the bottom drawer of my desk and closed it gently. The missed calls piled up again. The voicemails grew desperate, but none of it touched me, because I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. I was already somewhere they could never follow. They were falling apart, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't. I never moved away, never changed my name, never burned a single bridge. I just stopped walking back across them. The city stayed the same. The bus routes, the storefronts, the crooked stop sign outside my building, unchanged. But I wasn't the same man walking past them anymore. Some mornings I'd pass the old bakery where I used to pick up cakes for Cynthia's birthdays. Other times I'd cross in front of the boutique where I once bought Luna her winter coat, the one she never thanked me for. No bitterness, just ghosts. Not the haunting kind. The kind that fade when you stop pretending they still belong to you. I cook my own meals now, shopped for one, slept peacefully. The silence in my apartment was no longer sharp. It was soft, like a blanket I finally chose. Some days I expected the old noise to return. That panic pulse in my chest when a family call came in. That guilt sickness when someone needed a bailout. But it never did. I had done the impossible. I'd cut ties without screaming. I'd walked away without slamming the door. I hadn't retaliated. I hadn't humiliated them. I didn't throw their failures in their face. I just stopped giving them access to my life and let the absence speak louder than anything I ever said. I buried them, not in the ground, but in my world. A quiet funeral, unmarked, permanent. Months passed. I visited places I used to avoid, parks filled with laughter, restaurants I once skipped because family birthdays might happen there. I walked freely not as someone they might spot and drag back, but as someone who no longer belonged to their orbit. One morning I stopped in front of a street musician playing an old aching tune on a beat-up guitar. The song wasn't about revenge or heartbreak. It was about letting go. I stood there listening, and for the first time since I disappeared, I smiled. Not because I had to, not to please anyone, not to prove a point, but because I wanted to, because it felt good, because I could. I dropped a 20 into his guitar case, nodded once, and walked on. Each step lighter, each breath easier. And somewhere between the rising sun and the fading echoes behind me, I realized something true. I didn't need them. I never did. And now finally I was free. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It isn't a confrontation. It isn't slamming the door. It's leaving it open and simply choosing never to walk back through it. You see, real strength isn't in how much you can carry for others. It's in knowing when to set it down and let those who took you for granted finally feel the weight of their own choices. So ask yourself, are you still giving energy to people who would never bleed for you the way you've bled for them? If you've ever walked away to save yourself, you're not cruel. You're finally free. What did you think of this story? Have you ever been the invisible one? The one who gave and gave until there was nothing left? Let me know in the comments. And if you saw yourself in Silas, hit subscribe to Revenge with Max, where silence becomes power and every day someone reclaims their worth.